Just some of our viewers' comments as posted on our social media pages. I want to go to now to Mr. Morikada. Mr. Morikada, I apologize for interrupting you before. I wanted to get your reaction, of course, Mr. Morikada, and secondly, ask you about this as well. Riyad Mansour, the Palestinian ambassador to the UN, was speaking today, and he warned of Israel wanting to make this into a religious conflict through its restrictions on the religious freedoms of Palestinians at Al-Aqsa, for example. How legitimate do you think his warning is?
It is absolutely legitimate, and I think you should have an international force at Al-Aqsa, which the Israelis have rejected already, for a very simple reason. It is turning, the burning of the Joseph tomb is, in my opinion, a major escalation, and I'm just wondering if it was a random Palestinian act or if it was an organized thing by, say, people close to the Israelis, because they are putting some kind of a bomb, a religious bomb. We have been trying for quite some time now, but all the manifestations that have taken place at Al-Aqsa and now the burning of the tomb are kind of some kind of orchestrated maneuver, I would say. And this makes me worry about the religious issue or the religious dimension of this conflict. The other point I wanted to make about the Intifada, it is not an issue of labeling. It is an issue which is much more important, because an Intifada is something that has a political sense, a political dimension, as well as an uprising. So labeling is very, very important. If it's a day of anger, it's something. If it is an Intifada, it means it has political consequences.
Ms. Kara Mustafa, I'm wondering, how do you feel about this religious aspect here, as Riyad Mansour warned of at the United Nations, certainly with religious freedoms, curtailed at Al-Aqsa, and now, as Mr. Morikada mentioned, what happened at Joseph's tomb. Is this looking like a religious conflict?
Well, that's what the Israelis are trying to trigger, and they're going out of their way to pit Muslims against, or rather Islam against Judaism. It's probably been at the heart of the Zionist project from day one, even though, of course, ironically, Zionists were noted seculars who actually thought that Judaism were fairy tales and silly stories, and had no respect for the religious Jews who were fierce opponents to Zionism. But of course, the idea, and in order to maintain the myth of a biblical Israel, it has to now rely essentially on the extremist Orthodox Jews who now constitute the voting base for the right-wing electorate. And in that sense, their coming on board in this project is essential to maintain a stronghold and the position of Israel and its very extreme position in regard to any Palestinian rights or any compromise on the issue of Palestinian statehood. So the idea that the Jews are meant to be protecting Judea and Samaria is very central to the Zionist project, which is why Israelis have all interest in triggering a religious war, and which is why, of course, they've gone out of their way to diminish the PLO, which is essentially secular, which has numerous Christian figures who are not obviously Muslim and therefore cannot be argued within the prism of Islam versus Judaism. But of course, this is a fallacy, because although Palestinians are essentially a Muslim population, there is at the very least 30% of Palestinians are Christians, and they are suffering just as much of oppression as their Muslim counterparts.
Right, and so Mr. Morikada, I was reading an article today about Israeli settlers and the role that they are playing, saying that essentially the Israeli government is almost a servant to the settlers, because settlers are now stronger almost than the government itself, that settler movement. How then can we ever talk about compromise or peace when the settlers are armed, and now Israel has even eased rules on them carrying arms wherever they wish to carry arms?
What you are saying is extremely correct, because U.S. Secretary John Kerry said exactly the same thing. He said that the settlements are increasing the tension in the area, to which the Israeli ambassador in Washington a few minutes ago on CNN said it is not an issue of settlements, it is an issue, we have had an issue with the Palestinians for the last 50 years, even before the creation of Israel and before the 1967 war. This was the answer of the Israeli ambassador on CNN a few minutes ago. Basically, the Israelis, in my opinion, have done nothing, and also in the U.S. opinion, have done nothing to decrease the tension. It is unfortunate that the Israeli right supported, won the election with Netanyahu. But what is good about it is the fact that the Arabs had a 12% share of the vote. To what extent this will play, I don't know, but I heard a few of the Arab MPs in the Knesset who were very, very strongly against what was happening, naturally. And the majority of Netanyahu is very, very slim indeed. One cannot forget that the majority of Netanyahu is based on a political party which is not a pro-Netanyahu, but a pro-business political party. So if business starts to get hurt, maybe Netanyahu will lose his majority.
Okay, so Ms. Kara Mustafa, it's interesting whenever we talk about, the Arab MPs, et cetera, in the Knesset, and the fact that they are there, and certainly that can't be denied. But how does this all play out, do you think? Because, we have the extremists in the Knesset as well, and the Arab MPs. Is this essentially just a stage show in many ways to prove that Israel is still, quote unquote, a democracy?
Well, it's going back to my original point, which is that Israel was very much founded on propaganda. And the idea that somehow the 20% of Arab Israelis who are Israelis, in fact, can enjoy equal rights is part of the propaganda machine. But of course, we know that on the streets, they don't have the same rights. Arabs can't build buildings the way their Jewish counterparts can. And of course, even within the Knesset, I wouldn't go as far as saying there 20% of the Knesset is actually Arab. But of course, those who are there are simply used as a fig leaf for the Israeli government to say, well, look, we actually even have a parliament that is so inclusive that it actually includes Arabs. But of course, the Arabs are regularly hounded down. Sorry, the sound, are regularly handed out. They're very regularly aggressed. We remember Ms. Zouabi, who was the victim of an aggression even within the Knesset. So I think they are used as a show and in order to promote the idea that Israel is a democracy. But of course, it's nothing of the sort, given that they don't enjoy equal rights within Israeli society.
We have about a minute and a half left, Mr. Morkadeh. I wanted to get your final comments then. Looking at the macro issue, obviously, here, because this all goes down to, obviously, the occupation, the continuing settlement building, et cetera, the detentions, et cetera, when it comes to the Palestinian cause. Do you think the Arab world as a whole will react now, finally?
I don't think so. I think all of this are fires that are raging in the region. This is an additional fire that is raging in the region. You have the fire in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, and you have a general sense of rage all over the place. And the rage is seen on both sides of the divide in the Arab countries. So the Arab governments, in my opinion, are too busy to be able to take a decision on the Palestinians, and the Palestinians are pretty much left on their own, in my opinion.
Ms. Kara Mustafa, what do you think about that?
It's tragic, but I'd have to agree. I mean, much of the problems within Syria and Yemen, for instance, are even Arab-made. A lot of the situation deteriorated as a result of Arab meddling, making national situations worse. And I think that's a very tragic aspect of the wars there. But of course, as a result, the Arab world is completely divided, it's crumbling, and of course has completely neglected the Palestinian cause. And I think in that sense, we cannot expect a reaction, or indeed a strong reaction from the Arab nations, no.
Okay, we'll leave it there at that point, but of course we do appreciate both of your contributions to this edition of the debate. That was journalist and Middle East expert Ms. Hafsa Kara Mustafa, who'd been speaking to us live from London, and we were also joined by political commentator Mr. Jihad Murakada, who'd been speaking to us live from Beirut. And of course, viewers, we do appreciate your insights as posted on our social media pages, and of course for watching. Until next time, good night.